My name is Julia Harrison. I'm 34 years old, and I've lived in Austin, Texas for the last 9 years. I design healing spaces, gardens, and architecture that help elderly people find comfort and peace in their final years. It's a job that means something to me, maybe because I never got the chance to give my own father that peace. 2 months ago, I got a call from someone I didn't recognize, a nurse from Silver Hill, the small town where I grew up. She didn't mince words. "I thought you should know. Your father passed away this morning." That was it. There was no message from his wife, Evelyn. No call from Fiona, my half-sister. No obituary, no invitation to his funeral. Just silence, as if I'd never been part of his life at all. But I was. I had been once. So I booked the flight. Not because I expected anything, but because I had to say goodbye even if no one wanted me there. The funeral was already in progress when I arrived. I stood outside the gates of the Harrison estate, the place I had once called home, holding a single flower and hoping someone would let me in. A man in a black suit, one of Evelyn's assistants, blocked my path. "You're not on the list," he said. "Mrs. Harrison asked that only immediate family attend." "I am immediate family," I replied quietly. "I'm his daughter." He didn't even blink. "You're not welcome here." I stood there stunned. Through the iron gates, I could see the white tent, the rows of chairs, the casket draped in lilies. I stood in the rain and watched them bury my father. Not one of them looked back. A week later, I learned that the will was to be read. I didn't receive the information directly, of course. It came from a childhood neighbor who still sent me Christmas cards. "They're reading your dad's will next Thursday," she said. "I thought you should know, though. Evelyn and Fiona made it clear you're not invited." I showed up anyway. I wore a plain black suit and no makeup. I didn't come to fight. I came for the truth. The lawyer's office was downtown, just across from the old courthouse. A polished wooden sign read, "Sutherland and Ames, Estate Law." I arrived 10 minutes early, sat in the lobby, and waited. At exactly 11:00 a.m., Evelyn swept through the doors like royalty. She wore black silk diamond earrings and sunglasses, though there was no sun that day. Fiona trailed behind her in designer heels, carrying a crocodile purse. They looked right past me. "Excuse me," I said, rising. Evelyn turned. Her lips curled. "What are you doing here?" "I came to hear the reading," I said calmly. "This meeting is only for heirs named in the will," she replied, her voice sugar-coated and sharp. "You wouldn't want to waste your time." Fiona gave a theatrical sigh. "Seriously, Julia, you haven't been part of this family for over a decade." I didn't respond. I reached into my leather tote and pulled out a sealed folder, thick, official, stamped with the emblem of a different law firm. I handed it without a word to the receptionist. The woman behind the desk looked surprised. "Would you like me to give this to Mr. Ames?" I nodded once. 5 minutes later, the receptionist returned, her face pale. "Miss Harrison," she said, addressing me now directly. "Please come with me." Evelyn's expression froze. "What is this about?" she demanded, following close behind. "We already submitted the will." "There's nothing." But the door was already closing behind us. Inside the lawyer, Mr. Ames sat at a mahogany table, the file I'd handed over now open in front of him. His brow was furrowed. He looked up. "Mrs. Harrison," he said slowly, "we have a situation." And for the first time in my life, I saw Evelyn Harrison, polished, composed, calculating, go pale. I wasn't always unwelcome in the Harrison home. When I was a child, my father, Thomas Harrison, was everything to me. He was tall, thoughtful, and had the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. As an architect, he built luxury homes across the country, modern mansions nestled in forested hills, lakeside retreats for wealthy clients. But at home, he was different. He liked quiet mornings, black coffee, and reading the newspaper aloud, just to hear how the words sounded. My mother, Elise, was the one who gave the house its warmth. She had a soft voice, calloused hands from gardening, and a laugh that made you forget the world outside. She was the kind of mother who always made time to sit on the edge of my bed and ask about my drawings. "You've got a mind like your father's," she'd say. "But you see the world through color." She died when I was 7. A car accident. She was driving home from the library on a rainy night. A truck slid through an intersection. They said it was instant. I didn't understand what that meant. Not then. After the funeral, everything changed. My father shut down. He buried himself in blueprints and project deadlines. I remember wandering the house looking for his voice, but all I heard was silence. The meals stopped being warm. The garden overgrew. And the house once full of life began to feel cold. A year later, Evelyn appeared. She was beautiful, polished, poised. She worked in interior design and had met my father during a project in Connecticut. She moved into our home within 3 months, bringing with her her daughter Fiona, who was 10 at the time. I was 8. At first I tried. I smiled. I offered to share my room. But Evelyn didn't want to share anything. She immediately redecorated the house, changing the curtains my mother had sewn, replacing our chipped wooden dining table with glass and chrome. "This is a home now," she said with a cold smile, as if what came before had been less than that. Fiona was her mirror image, well-dressed, confident, and quick to remind me that she was older and smarter. She never hit me or yelled, but she knew how to cut with words. She'd correct me in front of guests, laugh when I wore hand-me-downs, whisper things like, "You're just the leftover." When I brought it up to my father, he barely listened. "Fiona's adjusting," he'd say. "It's not easy for her either." But it always felt like Evelyn and Fiona were given room to adjust while I was told to accept. As years passed, the divide grew. At family dinners, Evelyn would steer the conversation to Fiona's talents, her piano recitals, her essays, her perfectly curated science fair projects. If I tried to talk about my art or the awards I'd won at school, the room would go quiet. Once I brought home a sketch I had done of a garden space for a community center. I'd stayed up all night perfecting it. My art teacher said it could be submitted for a regional competition. I showed it to my father. Evelyn was nearby. He looked at it briefly, then passed it back. "It's nice," he said, "but maybe focus on something more practical, like Fiona Evelyn," added, sipping her wine. "She's already planning her business degree. Julia's still playing with crayons." They laughed. I didn't. From that day forward, I stopped showing them my drawings. When I was 15, I applied to a pre-college summer program for architecture students. I got in on full scholarship. I was ecstatic. But Evelyn wasn't pleased. 3 weeks away, she asked my father, "What about the family vacation?" "It's educational," I argued. "We can't just change plans for Julia." Fiona chimed in. "She never even asks." I went anyway. Alone. My father didn't come to see my final presentation. After high school, I received a scholarship to a state university. I chose a program focused on green architecture and sustainable community design. It wasn't a legacy school like Fiona's private college, but it was what I wanted. Before I left, my father handed me a check, just in case, he said. Evelyn tore it up the next morning. "You'll make it on your own," she told me. "You always seem to think you can." That was the last time I lived in that house. Over the next decade, I put myself through school. I worked at cafes, interned with small architecture firms, and eventually started designing healing spaces, gardens, libraries, sensory rooms for elderly communities. I sent my father letters, photos of my finished projects. I never got a reply. At first, I thought he didn't care. Later, I wondered if he ever saw them at all. Once I called the house. Fiona picked up. Her voice was flat. "Dad's not available. He's busy. And you should probably stop calling." And I did. But deep down, I never stopped wishing he'd call me back. The last time I heard his voice was a voicemail on my birthday 5 years ago. "Julia, it's your dad. Just calling to say, hope you're well." That was it. No, "I love you," no, "I'm proud." Just static. Then silence. When the nurse called to tell me he died, I didn't cry. I'd already grieved the loss of him 100 times before, but I still needed to know how had it ended. What had he left behind? Not money, not property, but words, intentions, acknowledgement. That's why I went to the reading of the will. That's why I brought my folder. That's why I stayed quiet while Evelyn mocked me. Because deep down I knew something she didn't. He had written me one final message, and I was going to make sure she heard it. The night before I returned to Silver Hill for the funeral, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed in my one-bedroom apartment in Austin, staring at the envelope I had received 2 weeks earlier. It had arrived from a private legal firm in Vermont, a firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Julia, if you're reading this, then I've already gone. I'm sorry for everything I didn't say and everything I didn't stop. Evelyn kept us apart for far too long, and I let her. I was weak, and you paid the price. But I've made changes, and I hope they reach you in time. You are my daughter. You always have been. And I want you to have what's rightfully yours. Love, Dad. Along with the letter was a revised will. It was signed dated 3 weeks before his death and notarized. The original copy the lawyer's letter said had also been submitted to their office and could be verified. I read the letter again that morning, then again in the car on the way to the airport. I held it like it was a life preserver because, in a way, it was. I arrived in Silver Hill on a Sunday. The funeral was scheduled for Monday at noon. I wasn't officially invited. No address, no time, no service details. But I knew the town. Knew that my father would be buried in the same cemetery where my mother lay under the oak trees in the oldest part of town. I got there just before noon. Rain was falling soft but steady. I stood outside the wrought iron gates of the cemetery, wearing a dark coat holding a white rose. Beyond the rows of headstones, I could see the gathering rows of black umbrellas, solemn figures in tailored coats, a silver casket on a platform. I took a step forward. That's when I saw them, Evelyn and Fiona. They stood under a large black canopy near the front, speaking with a man I didn't recognize. Evelyn turned and locked eyes with me. She walked over her heels, making sharp clicks on the stone path. "You need to leave," she said quietly but firmly. "I came to say goodbye," I answered. "That's all. You were not invited. Don't make a scene." Her voice was low, almost theatrical, like she was playing the part of the dignified widow. "I'm his daughter," I said. "You stopped being part of this family a long time ago," she snapped. She turned and gestured to a man in a black suit. "Security." He moved toward me. "You're not serious," I said. "Don't embarrass yourself," Julia Evelyn hissed. "Don't turn this into a performance." I stood still, the rose in my hand starting to tremble. "He was my father," I said again, more to myself than to her. "But not your family," she answered coldly. I turned and walked away, the sound of the service beginning behind me. I didn't look back. That night I checked into a modest motel on the edge of town. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The letter from my father open beside me on the bed. His words, "You are my daughter," echoed like a bell. The next morning I made a quiet visit to the cemetery. The grounds were empty now. The flowers had been removed. The earth still looked fresh. I knelt by the grave, placed the white rose on the soil, and whispered, "Goodbye." Then I pulled out the folded letter from my coat pocket and read it aloud. "You always told me to trust my instincts," I said, my voice cracking. "So I'm going to. I'm going to follow through. I won't let her erase me." A week later, I returned to Silver Hill one more time, this time for the reading of the will. I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea whether Evelyn and Fiona knew about the revised document, but something in my gut told me they didn't. If they had, they wouldn't have dared show up with such arrogance. And arrogant they were. They arrived 15 minutes late, Evelyn strutting into the law office with Fiona on her arm like a trophy. Their eyes scanned the room and froze when they saw me. "You have some nerve," Evelyn said. "I have something else too," I replied. She smirked. "This meeting is only for heirs named in the will." She said it with confidence, like it was the closing argument in a case she was sure she'd already won. I didn't say anything, just pulled the thick file from my bag and handed it to the receptionist. Evelyn's face didn't change immediately, but Fiona blinked, her brows knitting just slightly. Inside the file was everything: my father's final letter, the signed and notarized will, a series of email exchanges between him and the lawyer who had helped draft it, and most damning of all, a voice recording from the nurse who had cared for him during his final weeks. In the audio, my father's voice was hoarse but steady. "I need to change my will. I've made a terrible mistake. My wife has kept my daughter from me. I want Julia to have everything. She is the one who will carry on what matters." That was the voice Evelyn had tried to silence, and now it would speak louder than her schemes. The conference room was quiet. Too quiet. You could hear the rustling of paper, the clicking of a pen, even the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. At the center of the long mahogany table sat Mr. Ames, the Harrison family's estate attorney. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes that suggested he'd seen more than one family fall apart over money. He cleared his throat and looked up from the stack of papers I had given him. The room held its breath. "Mrs. Harrison," he began, addressing Evelyn. "We have a serious situation here." Evelyn lifted her chin. "Whatever Julia's brought in is clearly fabricated. My husband already signed his estate plan. I was present." Ames shook his head. "This document is legitimate. It's been notarized and submitted by a licensed law office in Vermont. I just confirmed with their firm it's the most recent binding version of Mr. Harrison's last will and testament." There was a pause. Then Fiona let out a nervous laugh. "You've got to be kidding," she said. "This is some kind of scam, right?" "No," Ames said quietly. "It's not." He turned the page toward her. "In this revised version dated June 2nd, Mr. Harrison revokes all prior wills and explicitly names his daughter Julia Harrison as the sole beneficiary of his estate, personal and business." I didn't look at Evelyn. I kept my eyes on the papers on the date on the signature I knew by heart. Evelyn's voice trembled for the first time. "That's impossible," she said. "I would have known. He was under medication. He wasn't in his right mind." Ames folded his hands. "We have corroborating evidence." I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. "This," I said, "contains an audio recording." Ames inserted the drive into his laptop. He turned the volume up and hit play. My father's voice filled the room. "This is Thomas Harrison. Today is June 1st. I am of sound mind. I've asked Nurse Rebecca Stanton to document this message. I want it known that my daughter Julia has not abandoned me. I was kept from her. My wife Evelyn and her daughter Fiona, they isolated me. But I've made changes. I want Julia to inherit everything. She's the only one who understands the legacy I hope to leave behind." No one spoke. The recording continued for another minute, including a timestamp and background details only someone in that hospital room could know. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn's face was pale. Fiona gripped the sides of her chair. "I don't understand," Fiona whispered. "Why would he do that?" I finally spoke. "Because he realized what you'd become," I said, looking at her directly for the first time in years. "And what I never stopped being his daughter." Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. "This isn't over," she spat. "You won't get away with this. I will contest this will." Ames looked at her calmly. "You're free to try Mrs. Harrison," he said. "But I wouldn't advise it." He opened another document. Miss Harrison also submitted emails between Mr. Harrison and his lawyer, confirming his intent to update the will, along with hospital records showing full cognitive capacity at the time of signing. And he added, glancing toward me, "There's more." I nodded. "There's one more recording," I said. This time the voice wasn't my father's. It was Evelyn's. She had been caught on a hospital security recording speaking to a man named Carter Langston, a competitor of Harrison Design Group. "I don't care what he wants," she said, her voice clipped and icy. "Once he's gone, Fiona inherits it all. I'll make sure of it. And when she does, we sell the waterfront contracts to Langston and cut the rest. The old man's legacy is finished." There was a pause, then her voice again. "Julia." "She's long gone. Dead weight. She won't touch a dime." The blood drained from Fiona's face. "I didn't know about that," she said, shaking her head. "You didn't stop her either," I replied. Mr. Ames closed the laptop. "Well," he said gently, "I believe this is now a matter for the courts, unless Miss Harrison prefers a private resolution." I looked at Evelyn, who was now trembling. "I don't want to see either of them prosecuted," I said, surprising even myself. "I don't want to drag this through the mud, but I do want them out of my father's house and out of his company by the end of the week." Evelyn scoffed. "You think you can just erase us?" "No," I said. "You did that to me. Remember, I stood. You turned my father against me, and when he finally saw through it, You tried to bury the truth along with him. Fiona stood too, her voice now pleading. Julia, please. I was a child when all this began. So was I replied. Mr. Ames leaned forward. I'll begin executing the revised will immediately. All assets, including the house design patents, business shares, and intellectual property, are to be transferred to Miss Julia Harrison. Mrs. Evelyn and Miss Fiona Harrison no longer have legal authority in any Harrison holdings. Evelyn's eyes burned with rage. Fiona looked like she might cry. I gathered my documents and turned toward the door. Before leaving, I looked back at them one last time. You always said I was the outsider, I said softly. But I'm the one he chose in the end. Then I walked out. Outside, the air was cooler than I remembered. The streets of Silver Hill felt less oppressive, as though something had shifted. I didn't feel victorious, just tired. That night I returned to the motel. I sat on the edge of the bed with the original letter my father had written beside me. The signature was real. The words were real. For the first time, I believed them. You are my daughter. The next morning, Mr. Ames called to confirm that Evelyn and Fiona had officially vacated the Harrison estate. No contest would be filed. They left quietly, he said. Mostly. He hesitated. Miss Harrison, I've handled many families, many estates. What your father did, he tried in the end. I hope that gives you some peace. I didn't answer immediately. Then I said it does. Some. He paused. And what will you do now? I looked out the motel window at the early morning light filtering through the trees. I'll take care of what he left behind, I said, and I'll make sure it becomes something good. He chuckled lightly. Your mother would be proud. That made my throat tighten. I hadn't heard her name in years. When the call ended, I pulled out my old notebook, the one I use for designs. On the first blank page, I wrote a title, Harrison House, a Center for Healing. I sat back and stared at the words. It was time to start building something new. Not for revenge, not for legacy, but for peace. People always say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what I wanted wasn't revenge. I wanted truth, proof, a chance to be heard without raising my voice. That meant preparing, and preparing quietly. It began 5 months before my father died. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. The distance between us wasn't measured in miles. It was in silence, in unanswered letters, in the years Evelyn had spent building a wall between us. Then out of nowhere, I received a short email from someone named Rebecca Stanton. The subject line was just, your father. The message read, Hi, Julia. I'm a nurse at Silver Hill Regional. I don't know if this will reach you, but I thought you should know your father's not well. He's been asking for you, but there are barriers. If you want to talk, here's my number. Rebecca. I remember staring at the screen for a long time. My heart was pounding. I didn't know if it was a trap or a gift. I called that night. Rebecca's voice was soft, careful. He's been in and out of the hospital, she said. Heart complications and signs of early-stage kidney failure. His wife controls everything, who visits, who calls. But when she's not here, he talks about you. A lot. Does he hate me? I asked quietly. She paused. No, she said, but he's ashamed. And I think he's afraid it's too late. That was the first time I heard my father's voice in almost 2 years. Rebecca held the phone to his ear. He sounded old, weak, but still him. Julia, he said, tentative. I'm here, I whispered. I'm sorry. Just those 2 words. But I felt something unlock in my chest. Over the next few weeks, we spoke in secret short calls when Evelyn was out of the hospital. Brief messages passed through Rebecca. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that somewhere behind all the silence, he still remembered me, still cared. I sent him photos of my project's community gardens I had helped design, before and after pictures of care centers I'd renovated. He called them beautiful. That was the first time in my adult life he'd praised my work. One day, Rebecca told me he asked about his will. That got my attention. He said he wanted to make changes, she explained. He didn't trust Evelyn anymore. He said he'd made mistakes. So I reached out to a law firm in Vermont, one that specialized in estate protection for cases exactly like his. I explained the situation, provided medical documentation from the hospital, showing my father was of sound mind, and arranged for an independent notary to visit him with new paperwork. It had to be done fast, quietly, legally. The new will was signed in the hospital, witnessed by 2 staff members, and notarized. The entire process was recorded with my father speaking clearly about his intentions. The firm submitted the documents immediately to their legal registry, while I kept a certified copy with me in Austin, just in case. When my father died, I already knew Evelyn would try to hide everything. I didn't expect to be invited to the funeral. I didn't expect them to inform me of his passing. I had prepared for that. What I didn't expect was how calm I would feel when they tried to shut me out again. Because this time, I was ready. This time, I had the truth. When I walked into that law office and handed over the folder, I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I just wanted someone to finally say, "You matter." And even if my father couldn't say it in person, he said it the only way he still could in ink. He left me the house. He left me the company. He left me the apology he couldn't speak aloud in life. And I would honor all of it, not by holding on to the past, but by building something better from its ruins. The Harrison estate stood silent when I returned. No more parties echoing down the long marble halls. No Evelyn arranging tulips that weren't hers. No Fiona clicking across the polished floors in stilettos. Just sunlight filtering through tall windows and the scent of dust. I walked slowly through each room. The foyer still held the chandelier my mother had chosen, the only thing Evelyn hadn't touched. In the library, my father's collection of architecture books lined the walls, exactly where he had always kept them. I paused in his study. The same oak desk, the same globe in the corner, but everything else felt emptier now. And somehow that was a relief. I wasn't here to relive memories. I was here to make something new. I met with Mr. Ames the next morning to finalize the transfer of assets. The house my father shares in Harrison Design Group, all of it, was mine now. I have no intention of living here, I told him. But I want to repurpose it. He raised an eyebrow. Into what? I smiled. A center for healing, for seniors, for people like my father. That was the beginning. I hired a local renovation team. I brought in a landscape architect from Austin. I contacted Rebecca, the nurse who had helped make everything possible, and asked if she'd join the board. Within weeks, the transformation began. We gutted the upstairs bedrooms and converted them into private therapy spaces, creative art rooms, and physical rehabilitation areas. The grand ballroom became a communal hall for gatherings and lectures. The backyard, once ornamental and unused, was turned into a restorative garden with wheelchair-accessible paths, benches under shaded trees, and a koi pond where residents could sit and reflect. I named it the Elise Center for my mother, because this time the house would belong to kindness. Word spread quickly in Silver Hill. At first, some people were skeptical. Others were curious. But slowly, locals started stopping by, former clients of my father, neighbors I hadn't seen in decades. Even employees from Harrison Design Group. One woman, Mrs. Bloom, who used to run the bakery near the post office, brought her husband to visit the garden. He had early-stage Alzheimer's. "This place feels calm," she said, "like it remembers something gentle." I told her that was the goal. As the project expanded, I turned my attention to my father's company. Harrison Design Group had been a powerhouse in luxury architecture, but in the last few years, under Evelyn's influence, it had shifted focus away from community, away from purpose. They had begun courting commercial developers, chasing profits through cookie-cutter condominiums and soulless resorts. That changed now. I met with the senior staff, most of them older, loyal men and women, who had worked with my father for years. "I want to bring back what he started," I told them. Affordable housing, green spaces, structures that serve people, not just investors. There were long pauses in those meetings, then quiet nods. "We've been waiting for someone to say that," one of the project leads told me. "We restructured the firm, cut ties with developers who didn't share our values, launched a series of public housing projects across the state. The first was a senior living complex in North Silver Hill, complete with gardens, libraries, and wellness spaces, modeled after the Elise Center. Accessible, affordable, beautiful, just as my mother would have wanted. Every day I poured myself into the work. Not to prove anything to Evelyn or Fiona, they were gone now, living quietly in another city, their names stripped from the company's records, but to honor the parts of my parents that had shaped me. My mother's softness, my father's vision. One morning, while overseeing a site inspection, I received a call from Rebecca. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. One of the residents at the center asked who designed the garden. I told her it was you. There was a pause. She said it reminded her of a place she dreamed of as a child. I stepped away from the construction noise and closed my eyes. That was all I needed to hear. Not praise, not money. Just that I had created something that mattered. That someone felt peace. The old house, once the place I was told didn't belong to me, now welcomed dozens of people every week. Elderly visitors, their children, volunteers, caretakers. They filled the space with music, with stories, with life. No more silence. No more coldness. Only light. And every time I passed through the main entrance, I touched the bronze plaque by the door. The Elise Center for Restoration, for Remembrance, for Renewal. Because I hadn't just reclaimed my inheritance, I'd rebuilt it into something lasting. Sometimes I walk through the garden in the early mornings before anyone else arrives. The sun filters softly through the trees, birds begin their quiet conversations, and the dew still clings to the petals. That's when I feel closest to both of my parents, to my mother, who once sat with me in a garden like this, showing me how to listen to wind chimes and breathe deeply, and to my father, who took too long to remember I existed, but in the end tried to make it right. People often ask me if I've forgiven him. I don't always know how to answer. Forgiveness is complicated. It isn't always a moment. Sometimes it's a process, a choice you make again and again until it stops hurting. I forgave him for his silence, for not seeing me, for letting someone else take my place at the table. But I don't forgive him because he earned it. I forgive him because I refuse to let bitterness grow roots in my garden. I also don't hate Evelyn or Fiona. Not anymore. They were broken people clinging to power, trying to rewrite the family story to fit their comfort. I don't excuse what they did, but I let go of needing to watch them fall. That's not peace. That's poison. What they tried to take from me, my voice, my family, my worth, I reclaimed on my own terms. Not with vengeance, but with intention. And in doing so, I realized something important. You don't have to destroy others to rebuild yourself. For so long, I thought I had to be louder, stronger, more ruthless than the people who wronged me. But it turns out quiet resolve is louder than rage. Compassion is more disarming than anger. And truth once spoken carries a weight no lie can hold against. The Elise Center now hosts more than just support groups and therapy sessions. It's become a place where families reconnect, where widows find purpose, where old memories make room for new ones. We've started a gardening program for seniors with memory loss. One woman misses. Lane told me, "When my hands are in the soil, I remember who I was before I got sick." That made me cry, because that's what this place is for. Not just healing the body, but restoring the soul. Sometimes I wonder what life would have looked like if my father had protected me sooner, if he had stood between me and Evelyn instead of fading into the background, if he had believed me when I said I felt like a stranger in my own home. But then I think maybe I wouldn't be who I am now. Maybe I wouldn't have learned resilience the way I did, or discovered that my worth doesn't come from someone else's recognition, but from the way I choose to live, build, and give. I once sat alone at a funeral, not allowed to say goodbye. Now I stand at the door of a house that once rejected me and welcomes strangers with open arms. Because home isn't where you're born, it's where you're seen, where you're valued, where you are allowed to heal. So no, I didn't win back a fortune. I reclaimed something far more precious. A place in the world where I belong, created by my own hands. And every time someone walks through that garden and says, "This feels like peace," I know I've kept my father's last promise. But more importantly, I've kept one to myself, to never let anyone define my worth again.